Welcome to episode 4 of Unlayered, where we will be talking NFTs with Zedd from Magic Eden. But before we get into all that, Dave, what's going on, man?
Good. Feeling better than last week, so that's encouraging. And yeah, actually, I've been working on the Solana economic forecast for the last week or two, and I just actually released it right before this episode. And so that's been like an interesting challenge to look at, and maybe something we'll discuss in a future week. But how are you doing, Sal?
Doing well, man. Hectic as always, but trying to keep my tabs on everything that's happening in the markets, especially this past week. I feel like it's been, I don't know if quiet's the right word, but my Twitter feed has just been taken over by everything happening in AI. It's hard to kind of separate out, what's happening in crypto, other than I guess like the ZK conference that happened this week. I'm not sure of anything crazy that's been going on.
Yeah, my timeline's filled with clips that go hard and things like that. Just these sort of videos of people getting into fights and stuff like that. So I don't know what Elon is doing.
Oh my God.
Doing with my timeline, but it's absolutely filled with that. But I do agree with you. I think the market's super quiet at the moment, and to me, it's just evidence that we're in the depression stage of the Wall Street cheat sheet. If you know what I'm talking about, that long, drawn out, painful depression stage. And I remember it from 2019. Really, it was basically the whole of that year and the start of 2020. Nothing's happening. Prices are hardly moving. People start to lose faith and start to question, is crypto actually going to amount to anything?
2019 vibes for sure. Well, I mean, the episode's about NFTs. I would be curious to hear your thoughts, Dave, on what do you think of NFTs, what do you think their future is, what you've seen happening recently.
It's one of those things where when they first came out, people laughed at them. And increasingly, when I see that in crypto, I'm going to start taking a closer look, because if something is ridiculous, people laugh at it. More often than not, that can actually be the next big thing. So I think that's a good example of that happening. Bitcoin was another example. And actually one which I'd like to maybe do a future episode on is WorldCoin. I don't know if you've heard much about that one, but I think that's another one which people are laughing at. And I'm starting to look a bit more into it. And I think it could be big. It could be another one of these weird, ridiculous things, which upon closer inspection, maybe hold more weight than...
I mean, just the fact that they're closely aligned with Altman, or I guess he has a big role in it, will pretty much guarantee it'll have some adoption, unfortunately. Or fortunately, I think it's a bit of a dystopian nightmare scanning our eyeballs and having it prove that we're human. But I think I agree with a lot of the points you made in that, NFTs look silly to outsiders. You had Bored Apes run up, during that bull market of 2021. There's these weird looking monkeys that are worth, at the peak, they were worth, $500,000 about in terms of floor price. But I've always been a big fan, a big believer in NFTs. I think NFTs will kind of be one of the keys to unlocking massive adoption in crypto. And not just like some esoteric weird, like, oh, I only care about utility NFTs, but I mean like even just 10K PFPs. Like that is one of the greatest inventions of a built-in community with this tradable asset. I wrote a lot about them at my previous job, wrote about DeFi NFTs, as well as like, how they could be used in gaming. And it's pretty exciting what you can do with them once you really dig into it. And we're going to actually talk a lot about NFTs with Zedd, who has some insane insights from the perspective of a marketplace operator. But I think things have been changing rapidly in that space.
To me, I just see it as almost the other side of the crypto market, with, coins like Ethereum and Bitcoin and Solana being the fungible side, and then NFTs just encapsulating this entire non-fungible aspect. Because if you think about real world assets, a lot of those are individual, unique assets, be they properties or specific options which have been tailored. There's a vast array of things which can't just be carved up and are identical upon closer inspection. And so I think NFTs right now are this 10K PFP, which, as you say, I think is an awesome use case. It's sort of tokenized community. But I think NFT, the term, the concept, is just going to keep on expanding and encapsulating all areas really of crypto, including finance, DeFi, community, governance, all these sorts of areas.
NFTs brought a lot of interest into ETH and caused gas fees. I think to this day, top gas guzzler is all of the Seaport contracts and OpenSea. One of the top uses of on-chain volume, outside of swapping on dexes and borrow lend protocols, is NFT marketplaces. And so there's absolutely something there, especially considering the market cap of all NFTs is maybe 1 to 5% that of all fungible tokens. So really punching above its weight there.
And just moving the conversation over, but today we're talking with Magic Eden. And I think the interview comes at an interesting time because, of course, they've basically just been usurped from the throne by Tensor Trade just in the last few weeks. And they're still sort of duking it out at the top to be the main marketplace on Solana. So just wondering, before we start the interview, about getting your takes on why you think Tensor has risen so fast, and how you see that battle playing out.
It's an interesting one. I think it has a lot of analogs to the battle between OpenSea and Blur this past fall, and it's still happening today, where Blur and Tensor I kind of group as like similar in that they're very much trading oriented NFT marketplaces with really fast UI, really optimized for trading quickly, and most importantly, both have incentivization, and that certain activities, if you use that platform, you will have a claim on an airdrop for a future token. That has been like the key, I think, to driving all of that massive interest and adoption of those platforms. And Magic Eden and OpenSea are in this other bucket where they're both kind of like the OGs, traditionally had all of the volume, and although that's changed now for both recently. But historically, OpenSea used to have 90% plus market share, and the same was true of Magic Eden on the Solana side. And so I think we're almost seeing this thing play out again where people are using Tensor more. I think the number of people actively trading NFTs has shrunk during a bear market, and that user base is probably enjoying some of those power features that Tensor has more, and maybe the incentivization plays a role. It is actually hard for me to parse out what is really driving this usage. Is it really just the UI? Is it really just the incentivization? I read some headline a few months ago where I think about 200 people were driving more than half of Blur's volume. It's a very tiny group that's kind of powering, and like Blur's volume is bigger than OpenSea's, so you do the math and it's really just a small subset of whales that are effectively manipulating the volume. It's hard for me to say whether there's some long-term trend here or not, but I do think Tensor is doing some really interesting things.
I definitely think there's an interesting difference between the companies. I would classify OpenSea and Magic Eden more as like a Web 2 company so far in the way that they have approached market share. I think they've both come in. They haven't shared a percentage of the company with the community. And I think, I don't know so much about OpenSea, but Magic Eden certainly have been quite anti-competitive in some of their actions to date, which is, in traditional business, this is how you get to the top, So I'm not saying there's anything necessarily wrong in that, but I feel like this new batch of companies have come in and they're maybe more encapsulating the Web3 ethos in terms of they are giving away some of the share of the network to the users, and that they are much more open in terms of their APIs and in terms of composability, having other projects building on top of them. So I just wonder if there's, during the bull market, maybe Web2 companies rise to the top for some reason very, very quickly. But during this bear market, it's more the Web3 companies who actually are willing to share proceeds of the company with its users, which will turn out to do better and come out on top after this period. I don't know if you've got any thoughts on that.
I don't know. I think there is a lot of things that are more Web3 about Blur, I suppose, and Tensor. I'm kind of grouping them in the same category because they're quite similar. But I think the other thing that helps OpenSea and Magic Eden is that they're just easier to use, and I think a bit more mass market appealing. And they're all multi-chain, interestingly, where Blur is ETH and Tensor is only on Solana. Really interesting points and questions we're bringing up. I think we do dive into these topics during the interviews, so perhaps now is a good time for me to introduce officially our guest. We have Zedd Yin from Magic Eden, co-founder and COO of Magic Eden, one of the OGs in the Solana NFT space. He previously had stints at Coinbase and DYDX, and super exciting to have him on today. All right, so we are joined today by Zedd of Magic Eden. I'm sure a lot of you guys have heard of Magic Eden or used them in the past, so awesome to have him on board today. What's going on, man? It's been a while since we last were on stage at Breakpoint, was it? That was like almost 6 months ago at this point.
Yeah, dude. Crazy how quickly that time's gone. It's good to see you again. That panel we were on was a spicy panel, if I remember correctly. So
Yeah,
it's
totally.
it's good.
What was the subject?
We were talking about royalties. I think that was kind of the flavor of the month or even season. That was around the time when marketplaces were testing out basically doing no royalties, and that was started on the Solana side of things with the AMMs. And then the marketplaces started doing them too, and then that kind of drizzled over to ETH as well. And yeah, so our panel was a good mix there at the collection level, artist level, marketplace level, and then I was just kind of running point in between and asking questions, trying to figure out what the future of royalties was. I mean, has your thoughts changed on it? I think we kind of concluded on that panel, to refresh you, in that royalties aren't necessarily dead, but they might kind of how they work might change.
I don't think my views have changed too much, but it almost feels like a different era now, even though it was only 6 months ago, right?
100%.
What I mean when I say that is there's also been some evolution from a social acceptance perspective and a technical perspective, right? Because now you have pretty, I would say, wide accepted adoption of like operator filters on EVM that are effectively protecting royalties now. It's like the game theory has reached its its end state. And then on Solana, obviously everyone is using PNFTs, like the new standard, the new asset standard from Metaplex. So most of the new mints, I would say, are going through that.
Yeah. I think they teased it at one of the other sessions at the time. Can you tell us and maybe our listeners a bit more about what's different about PNFTs versus the way things were done before on the Solana side?
The PNFT effectively enforces royalties, and there are obviously trade-offs to it. So in order to get that enforcement, there's a certain element of, I guess like decentralization that you have to give up at the standards layer. And for most creators, now that it's been in the market for a little bit of time, it's somewhat becoming more and more accepted. Now, I'd say it's actually pretty accepted now. Most of the launches that we see now on Magic Eden's launchpad effectively use PNFTs, and a lot of the old collections, not all of them, but a lot of them have also migrated. So it's good to see with all these things, it isn't so much a technical consensus; it's like a social consensus. It's taken a few months, but it's good to see that at least the community is rallying around a solution, which is that is the most important thing, and that was the thing that we were also trying to push for at the time. It just that there wasn't really a good solution at the time. So it's funny because it's one of those things that, man, it was actually like such a topical thing in November last year. But I would say like, most of the ecosystem has not really thought about it probably in the last 3-4 months. Just to give you a sense of how quickly things evolve and things change.
Actually, you brought up an interesting point that I think would be a great segue into a topic that maybe is more topical. So this idea of royalties, where they are effectively social consensus mechanisms, in that, prior to NFTs and stuff like that, it was just the marketplaces that decided to enforce them and then would send payouts to the creators. And obviously some marketplaces could skirt them, specifically like AMM style NFT marketplaces. So one thing that is also a social consensus, but in a completely different way, is this movement in the Bitcoin ecosystem with Ordinals, where Bitcoin doesn't support non-fungible tokens at all at the protocol level. It was Casey Rodomar who kind of created this way to ascribe specificity to individual Satoshis that then other builders and consumers latched onto in this ordinal ecosystem, where that's literally the name. They just order the Satoshis, and that's how you get that quote unquote non-fungibility. Talk to us a bit about, Magic Eden's obviously been a big part of this ecosystem and has built that as a core feature in the product. Talk to us a bit about your views on ordinals.
Yeah, for sure. Let me give you guys a bit of backstory because I think it's a pretty interesting journey that we've taken around ordinals. So in general, it's been a pretty new, I'd say technology, right? To give you some sense, we launched our ordinals marketplace in around the middle of March. So it's been about 2 months. And the very first products that were built around February, I want to say, because Ordinals as a standard or as a technology really only came out in January. So that's like to give you the sense of what it feels like right now. It's almost like if you minted, I don't know, SMB or something in the very early days of Solana, right? It's that feeling because like nothing really worked properly. You know, some of the wallets were kind of jank. People were paying random other people in Discord to do random trades. It was like that. It's like that feeling.
Right.
Which for some people, I don't know, probably you guys and for me especially, it's very nostalgic. It's like that was a really fun, period of time, right? But let me sort of explain a bit about what it is. So Ordinals is basically, it's like a protocol that allows a way in which to sequentially number satoshis, which is probably most people would know is the smallest unit of Bitcoin. And then users can then, or anyone can then inscribe data onto those satoshis to make, what Casey called digital artifacts, right? And the really cool thing that we were drawn towards was that these are always immutable, right? The art, the text, whatever data that you want to inscribe is like directly on the blockchain. And that's different because even on Solana or on other chains, even ETH, a lot of it's like the NFT is pointing to some media file, right? And like that's being stored by like IPFS or something, or Arweave or something. Whereas this is like really purely on the chain and immutable. So it's in some sense the purest form. And we actually started to hear about it because, as a crypto native company, we have a bunch of people in our company that followed Bitcoin really closely, and they were like, "Oh man, like this Ordinals thing's really interesting." And then like some Discord links got shared around the company. So we have this channel in the company called NFT Banter, where people just like share like interesting things that are happening. And I remember Joe Dole, who's our general counsel, was kind of like, "Hey guys, Ordinals is going off." And then Chartfu Monkey, who a lot of Solana people would know, was also one of the really early ones. And we just got really excited about it. So decided to start building it, I think around mid to late February.
And just coming back, so you were talking about the early days in Solana. I'd love to sort of go back and relive those days because I joined around the Degen Ape Academy mint. I saw the sort of shocking user experience that Solana Art offered everyone. And then suddenly you came up. There was a bit of competition, I remember at the time. And then suddenly Magic Eden just stole the show in the space of about 1 or 2 months. So I just wanted to get your take on how it was at the start and also why you chose Solana and just how that crazy run up was to just sort of dominating the NFT marketplace.
Yeah, it was a pretty crazy time. I remember really distinctly because the first sort of period of time where I really, really took notice on Solana, at least from like a user perspective, was when I remember Phantom, I think they announced like a fundraise, or they announced like the launch of the beta wallet. Yeah, sometime in the first half of 2021. And I remember sitting up and thinking, oh, that's really interesting, because I knew the Phantom guys from DeFi days in Ethereum. So we had like gotten to know each other, cross paths, become friends. So when those guys went across to Solana, I was like, oh, that's really interesting. And prior to that point, I'd only really thought about Solana as more of a theoretical thing, because I remember when I was at DYDX and we were building obviously a bunch of like trading products, I went and actually spoke on a panel that was hosted by Anatoly and Dom from the Solana team.
Oh, wow.
So I kind of knew about them, but I never really connected, like at least as a user, I'd never really gotten to the point of actually using the stuff. So then when Phantom launched, I started to look into it more. And then that was around the time also that all these initial like early projects were launching. And it was very just hard. I just remember it was like when the transactions actually go through, it's like, wow, that's like really buttery and smooth. But some of these product experiences are really challenging and not very intuitive. So that's what got the juices flowing with myself and my co-founders to really get something going. And we felt that if you could build some very, very slick consumer products, like consumer products with the sort of polish that you would expect from traditional consumer companies, even outside of Web3, and you combine that with the very, very fast chain that's under the hood, you could build the best experience in crypto. So that's what we really, really believed. And that obviously then opens up a whole bunch of interesting use cases that may not have been possible before. So that was the original thesis. And man, in the early days, I remember just everything just felt so new, right? You could, like, people were just experimenting, doing anything, and everything was basically brand new. And that's also another good signal of opportunity, because you kind of look at what are the lengths that people are willing to go through to do something. And if those hoops are like insanely high that they're trying to jump, it's almost like, yo, there's a market here. There's something really going on that's exciting.
This is 2021 we're talking about, which is, I guess, right at that, I call it the beginning of the NFT boom, especially that summer. You have 3 other co-founders, right? Like, how did you guys meet? When did you guys come together, decide to do this? Then from that point, when did you guys launch? I believe Magic Eden launched in October of 21, if I'm not mistaken. Tell us a bit about that timeline.
That's right. So the 4 of us were friends from just from the Bay Area, San Francisco. The kind of like connection basically is that obviously we all lived in SF, we all worked in tech. 3 of us are also Australian. So for anyone,
Wow.
all the Aussies can probably relate. Like, wherever you go, you kind of just end up hanging out with Aussies, which is the case with me.
They are everywhere.
Everywhere. Sorry, apologies to everyone in advance. So yeah, Jack and myself, we had been talking for a long time about just crypto stuff. I mean, this was in 2017 or something. I was just at DYDX, and DeFi hadn't really started yet. It wasn't even a term. And I remember saying to Jack, like, hey man, you got to come to crypto. You got to like get involved, because he was a PM at Google at the time. He was friends from high school with Sid, who's the third guy. And Sid was an early engineer at Uber Eats with Rex. So that's how Rex came into the fold. And when we first started noodling on some ideas, we just felt that between the 4 of us, we had the right balance of experience, skills, interest to kind of make something work. We didn't know exactly what, actually, but we knew that as soon as we started using some stuff on Solana, we knew that we wanted to do something on Solana. And then it became pretty clear that there was an opportunity in NFTs, just because not only was it obviously popping off on ETH, but you could kind of tell that like there was something organic that was developing on Solana, and it was also going to be uniquely different. It wasn't just going to be a exact copycat community. So the 4 of us started working on it, I think in around like mid-September, roughly. We got together, we cobbled together a little alpha group on Discord. There's maybe like 25 people in that alpha group on Discord who became our first users of the product. And we put it out there. People seemed to like it. We went down, I think, for a day, because we obviously didn't build it with a lot of infrastructure. But that was also another sign that people liked it. And I think at that point we decided to, just actually give it a crack and go full time. And that was around the time Chartfu Monkey joined, who we met on Discord. And then Tiff, who I think a lot of people also know in the community, she joined as well to lead marketing. So that was kind of the early crew that got together. September, October 21. So it's only been about 18 months.
Oh, that's crazy, isn't it? And then obviously, Magic Eden got huge, NFTs and Solana got huge. And then it reached this point, didn't it, where almost every single launch, every hyped launch that was happening on Magic Eden was basically crashing the network. I mean, how was that going through? Because, there must have been this anticipation of like, God, are we about to bring down the network again every time you're launching?
It was insanely stressful, I would say. There was probably this period between, I want to say it was like January 22 through to like May of that same year. So like 4 or 5 months where not only was like Launchpad just taken down the network, but our site was also crashing, because simultaneously when Launchpad is happening, everyone's also trying to trade on secondary. So we just got insane levels of traffic, and it's basically a scale that you would not expect within a company that's like 4 months old, right? And we didn't have like a very large team at that point. I think maybe we had 15 people, something like that, right? Like pretty small team, not all of whom were engineers. So that was like a pretty stressful period of time. But also, again, like, I don't know, with all these things, I think these are the kind of problems you want to see in a startup, right? Because a lot of founders are going through this, whatever, like, idea maze up front. And then you pick an idea, then you're trying to find like early validation, or you're trying to find like product market fit. And these are all basically signals of that. So as hard as it is, I remember we were sort of talking to one of our investors, Avichal, who's at Electric Capital, and his main message to us, which really resonated at the time, because we were feeling really down about ourselves. We were like, man, we can't keep the site up. It's like actually pretty brutal. He was like, man, you know what? Like, this is a good problem to have. And the fact that people are complaining and yelling at you means that they care, and you should keep going. Like, you guys should keep going, because you're onto something. So that was a really, really, important, I think, message that we had to hear at the time. And I don't know, same kind of thing now. It's like when things are really up or things are really down, it's like the same thing. You just, the key is to just keep going, and we're in this for a very, very long period of time. So still nonetheless, very stressful period.
So you guys started off on Solana, obviously, but over time added some other chains, Polygon, ETH, and obviously Ordinals as well on the Bitcoin network. Talk to us a bit about what that's been like. I think what we see oftentimes on Twitter is companies go multi-chain, and maybe they kind of struggle to like get inroads with those other communities, because I guess as it turns out, there's not a ton of overlap, or maybe not as much as they thought there would be. And it's kind of hard to outcompete with these builders that are building really specifically for one user base on one chain. So tell us a bit about what going multi-chain has been like so far for Magic Eden.
Today, Magic Eden is on Solana, Ethereum, Polygon, and Bitcoin. So those are the 4 chains that we're on. And long term, the thesis around this is that, and we still believe this thesis, but it's just a question of, I think, the time horizon upon which this is realized. But the thesis is basically that, yes, at some point, it's going to matter relatively less what chain the user is on. They may be very, very different pieces of content, types of NFTs, use cases, etc. But today, the friction that's so real to go between chains and like set up a wallet to like do a new thing on ETH or Ordinals or whatever, I think all of that would just get much, much, much easier. So that's the thesis. And then therefore, as a marketplace, a marketplace prides itself on having the widest, most available, most easily discoverable inventory, right? That is true for any kind of marketplace, full stop. And we are no different. So long term, we that's the world that we believe. Now, many lessons along that journey, because it's true. Like, that's, I think, the point you make around like there are not many dApps out there that have actually managed to do this well. I think that's actually a really, really, really true. If you look at even in DeFi, I can't think of many that have really done it well. I think the ones that have done it, that have been okay, have been some of the pretty early and more simple DeFi products.
The blue chips, like Aave is maybe the best one, the OGs for each use case.
Exactly, yeah. Some of those guys going to Polygon, some of them now going to L2s. So that's generally the best examples that I've seen. Yeah, it's because these communities are so tribal, right? They really are today. That's just the fact of the matter. And I think they will continue to be so. We thought that by now there would have been some more like cross-pollination, but I actually think that it's roughly the same as where it was last year, if not actually become even slightly more tribal in a bear market, which, by the way, I think is very normal, because you sort of, as a user, it's almost like you pick a lane and you're very, devoted to the community that you grew up around, right? And that's just a real thing. So yeah, some of the experiences we've had, it's been interesting, because from a technical perspective, building on a chain as a standalone is not necessarily like a crazy thing to do, but it does bring a bunch of complexity into your backend infrastructure, which I think, that has to be accounted for. But the harder thing, I think, is more to be relevant and deep in the community. That is actually a real thing. And on Solana, we did that really, really well in the early days. We have continue to have a big presence there. And then Ordinals, I think we've done that really, really well, candidly, like, if I'm honest, because I think we've dedicated some really good people and like people who really care about it. But what's been relatively more challenging has been ETH. ETH has been very challenging. because it is a big market. There's established players. There's like all these metas that are going on. There's all these creators. It's just big. And so that's something that we often think about. It's like, okay, what is the bet we want to make and how do we want to make it? Because just going there with, I don't know, like 1 eng or 2 eng to like build something and then like let it run, that's actually not the way you can win, right? So yeah, a lot of learnings and a lot of lessons. And I think long term, we still believe in this thesis, but the time horizon might be a little different.
Quick follow up there. I think I love a lot of the points you're making, and specifically with ETH, man. That is a tough nut to crack. I mean, looking at just CryptoSlam's data, it's about 10x in terms of volume what Solana does, and market cap wise, it's probably 3 to 10x, depending on where price is. So it can be hard to kind of attack that giant elephant in the room. One question though, because now you guys are kind of integrated with so many chains, are you noticing any differences between users of like one chain versus another? And I'll throw out some tropes out there for fun. Solana, my old coworkers would always call Solana NFTs like dollar store NFTs because it was cheap, and then the collections tend to be cheaper. ETH was for like rich people that liked art and wanted to show off their art blocks or whatever. And Bitcoin honestly might take that to the next extreme, where it tends to be just whales, and the average sale size can be super high, and you saw it with collections like ordinal punks and so on and so forth. Are you noticing any kind of characteristics like this?
I agree. Those are the stereotypes, right? I think like Solana dollar stores it's like a little harsh, man. Solana dollar stores.
Yeah, it's more of a 2021 kind of thing, but had to throw it out there. Had to make some people mad.
Yeah. True. You got to spice things up. Yeah, I think there's definitely differences. I think what you've laid out is more like the stereotypes, right? Which is generally, yes, these are the different places on the spectrum. It's like, yeah, ETH is like more expensive stuff. Ordinals is kind of similar. It's like just more expensive stuff. In some ways, it correlates to like block space when you think about it, availability of block space and transaction costs and time. And then, yeah, Polygon and Sol are relatively like cheaper from like a average basket size perspective. But actually, when you really boil it down and talk to the users, man, sometimes I kind of feel like there's an element of like, man, why can't we all just be friends? Yeah, because all these users are actually not
exactly
not that different. Like everyone loves NFTs.
Yeah.
Everyone loves to get in the community and make friends. Everyone loves like discovering new things. Everyone loves like good art. Like all these characteristics are actually pretty consistent, but they're just applied differently. And the friction of having to move and then learn like a new thing, it's like learning a new language. It's like, such a pain, That's why I fundamentally believe that over time, this would just get better and better. I mean, I'll be honest. I mean, my education in crypto was on Ethereum. Like I spent a lot of years in DeFi on Ethereum. So there's a soft spot for, in my heart for all of that stuff that's happening there. But at the same time, man, I also love Solana. I think it's amazing. And there's some shit you can do here that you cannot do anywhere else. And it's just about telling that story. And in some ways, our job at Magic Eden, now that we have the platform, the opportunity to do so, is to actually try and tell that story just more broadly, right? That is what I would consider one of the ways that we can really, really be successful over time. It's making sure that people know that story. We can tell it. We tell it effectively. But yeah, honestly, shouldn't be that different, but there are differences across the users. But fundamentally, I think they're actually all kind of one and the same.
I can fully understand the Bitcoin and the Ethereum take, but I'm just wondering, Polygon, what's driven your decision to support that ecosystem? Was it maybe Utes moving over, or I mean, Ethereum NFTs long term, maybe they're not going to stay on the L1 because of increasing gas fees. So maybe you think they might end up going to Polygon. Just wondering what your views are.
Yeah, really good question. There's a couple of reasons. One is that we've always had a bit of a bent towards supporting gaming as a vertical. Yeah, we focused on, right? So we have a small squad led by Chris Ackerman, who's our chief gaming officer, who was a very, very early OG mobile gaming guy. So he's kind of seen the the waves of adoption of different mobile, different gaming platforms, of which we think Web3 gaming is another one of these platforms. So we have a thesis that that's going to become very big. And as a result, a lot of the gaming studios are working with Polygon as a way to kind of like test the waters in Web3. So number one reason is we want to serve those creators, right? As a multi-sided marketplace, we obviously have to do right by our users, but we also want to serve creators, and that's, I think, one of the areas that if you look at a lot of the various NFT marketplaces, like on all of the chains, there's not that many that have outsized focus. They spend mindshare on actually developing a big creator community. So that's one area and one of the reasons. The second reason, them doing the migration across to EVM, we thought would be an interesting catalyst moment, right? Polygon NFTs, but as a moment to bring a lot of liquidity into that ecosystem. And it has happened somewhat in that prior to them going over, there wasn't really a PFP market. It was a lot of just gaming items. Now I think there is much more of a PFP market, and it's growing. So we'll see how it goes. I think the really interesting question for Polygon long term is that they are moving or encouraging developers to kind of build on their like ZK EVM solution, right? Rather than the current thing, which is the proof of stake. And the real question is, are developers going to take to that, or are they going to take to the L2s like Optimism or Arbitrum, right? Or even like some of the newer L1s that are coming out. So there's a little bit of an open question, I would say, around that. I think we'll see what happens. But for now, like I think a lot of the gaming projects are still working there.
And I sort of referred to it, but do you have any thoughts on what will happen with Ethereum NFTs long term? Do you think, because as we get more and more roll-ups on that ecosystem, I think the ETH1 fees will continue to drive up. So it'll be interesting to see how that goes. And are you looking maybe to deploy to L2s if they start building up a reasonable NFT ecosystem, or do you think it will stay on the L1 maybe?
I think for the time being, we expect things to stay on L1, but the fact that there's so much liquidity on L1 bodes well for the L2s, in that like it's much easier to keep liquidity within just the EVM sphere, right? So in some sense, that is very bullish for generally L1, L2. How and when that migration actually happens, it's very hard to say. It's very, very hard to say. But I would say that's not the only interesting like L1 to L2 kind of relationship. Like you have now interesting options as a developer, because if you think about it, back in 2018 or even in 2021, if you're a developer looking to start a Dapps, like realistically, where were you going to go, right? In 2018, you had to go to Ethereum. That's basically the only place you could go. Now, like I said, 2021, you could go to ETH or Solana and Polygon, I guess a little bit. Yeah, that was basically it. Now I think there's 5 or 6 very, very real options available, which is like the L2s, Solana, Sui, Aptos, Polygon, ZK EVM. It's pretty cool, actually. It's a really, really interesting time to be a developer in crypto. So it's hard to say exactly how it's going to play out, but this is not a Magic Eden view, but just my personal view, I think EVM still is they have the lion's share, right, of liquidity. I think Solana is best placed as an L1 above anyone, just because, again, there is already a very, very tribal and passionate community here. And that's some stuff you can't buy. I said to some people the other day that 2018 Ethereum feels like 2023 Solana. You have the same tribalism, vocal nature, passionate community, which is amazing.
One trend actually that I didn't think we had a chance to touch on yet, but going back to this fall a bit, is so we had the royalties thing happening in one kind of lane, but then the other lane is this emergence of, let's call them, pro trader class of NFT users, or maybe incentivized traders, air quotes, the rapid meteoric rise of Blur, displacing OpenSea and just doing a really phenomenal job. I mean, the product itself is pretty impressive for anyone who hasn't used it. Very different from OpenSea, and kind of paralleling that a bit in a lot of ways is on the Solana side. Tensor coming out with kind of a similar pro trader oriented interface and doing a ton of volume. And that's been kind of a loud theme we've been seeing on crypto Twitter, specifically with regards to Solana NFTs. What have been your views on this movement now and the rise of Tensor?
I think there's like a really interesting confluence of factors here. One is obviously there's the pro trading kind of element of this, and which is pretty, I think, natural to expect in all kinds of markets, so to speak. Number two is, as we have entered progressively more and more into a bear market, you kind of think about what are the types of users that remain in that market. It's like the people that are pretty hardcore, the people that are really into it, right? And you've seen a gradual slowdown in the number of just more normal, like casual users that come in, maybe trade once every month or something, or they come and check out like a new mint, right? Or whatever that is. That is becoming progressively less proportionally as a proportion of what it used to be. And then you have the juicing of just like providing incentives, right? That's like the third layer of what's happening. Observation of at least the ETH side has been, Blur's, I think, done an amazing job building a really good product. They've been very thoughtful about the incentives, and they've captured the mind share of a lot of the pro users. If you look at like OpenSea's daily volume and user base is remarkably flat, actually, which tells me that there's actually just a lot of people that habitually use it, and as a new user, you would go to OpenSea first, right? That's still, I think, very true. I don't know like exactly the data. I'm not privy to like any data that they have, but that's my observation. On the Solana side, I think actually it's similar in the sense of those three events are also happening. And in fact, Solana has always been much more of a trader kind of market, right? In some ways. And you have the impact of incentives that are coming out. I think there's many ways to kind of think about this, but the key, I think, for us, and I'd say for anyone who's really building in the space, is that, man, you got to take the long-term view here. And the long-term view is, how do you get like 50x more people, 100x more people to come into the space, right? 1000x more people. You have to be very, very focused on that. I think for us, obviously, there's going to be interesting things that we want to do around rewards, incentives, new user experiences, new products. But fundamentally, these things have to be done in like a very intentional kind of way. So I think it's cool. I actually think that some of the products that like Soul Sniper, Tensor, some of these guys have been building for a long period of time has actually been amazing. And now the like loans are basically taking off now as well. We actually really like all of it. But I think that we take a very long-term view. These kinds of incentives, especially if you're going to do a token, you can only do it once. You got to be pretty thoughtful about how you do it.
My view on this is it caught me by complete surprise. I like what you said about the long-term view, because that's kind of how I think about this space is, how do you get tons of people to use it? How do we get really easy to use products out there for people? And I think OpenSea and Magic Eden have been kind of examples of that on the NFT side. And so what surprised me this past fall when Blur exploded was this is seemingly not necessarily like the easiest or friendliest product to use. Like, it's for a very specific user base who want to do TA on like floor price movement for some reason, and just all these like really extra power trading features. I never saw that kind of out voluming OpenSea, And I dug into the numbers a bit at my last job, and it seemed like it was kind of a really small cohort of users sending NFTs back and forth and just trying to farm the airdrop, so to speak, which to your point maybe isn't like sustainable long term, especially because you only have so many tokens. In terms of like product development for Magic Eden, like, do you guys kind of take that view of like, maybe this is a flash in the pan kind of thing, and like the interfaces for people to use this stuff will look less like it? Or do you guys take inspiration from things like Tensor and Blur?
Flash in the pan would be too dismissive of a view, I think, because actually anyone who's experimenting with tokens and incentives I feel like is pushing the space forward, right? Because even in DeFi, we've seen a lot of innovation on token models and incentive models, but I would say broad brushstrokes, but I would say that most incentive models are pretty rudimentary in that it's like throwing a bucket of water at at like a small little hole, right? It's very sort of brute force, right? So I still think there's a lot more innovation to come in terms of how to actually do these well and make them sustainable long term. I will say some companies in DeFi that have done this really well, where they've used tokens for some period of time, and over that time it has garnered a lot more usage that then became organic usage, right? And I think DYDX, I think, is a really good example of that, where they obviously had that big lift when they launched their token, and then it's been really relatively well sustained. Actually, they see like pretty good organic traffic too. So there's ways to do it, and I think I would say on the two ends of the spectrum that you mentioned, I'm more on the end of I think that people are pushing this thing forward, which is great. It means that for us, we can obviously look at it, learn from it, because again, it's not something that anyone should really rush into. But to call it a flash in the pan is also, I think, too dismissive, because sometimes if these work, it's sort of like the whole momentum thing, right? It's like liquidity begets more liquidity, and you start to build that, and that can be a very, very strong and hard thing to reverse. So yeah, I think we are generally pretty excited, supportive of the innovation. You sometimes do have to hold your nerve a little bit in terms of a long-term view, because as I said, it's like, who's going to be successful here is the people that are going to bring in quite a lot of new people into the space. And I think that is where our role really comes in, because especially on Solana, it's basically, I think us and Phantom are probably the two companies that have established and have the sort of credibility to go out to pretty much any company in the world at this point, and we can have a conversation with them, right? And that, I think, is really powerful, because there's not a lot of companies that can do that, and that's the stuff that's hard, takes a long time, but someone we want to do that kind of work, because that's the stuff that builds long-term product and partnership differentiation.
Yeah, super interesting. Just looking forward more into the future of NFTs, because I don't know about you, but I feel like we've barely scratched the surface about what NFTs can actually be. I think 10K PFP collections is, hopefully will just become a very tiny subset. And especially now we have compressed NFTs as well on Solana, massively reducing the cost. I'm hoping that it's going to start being used for things like concert tickets, or, you buy a Gucci handbag and receive an NFT as well at the same time. How are you thinking about this? Do you envisage Magic Eden to try and capture, all of these different use cases on this particular site? Or just wondering, how your views are about the future of NFTs, and then how Magic Eden is trying to position themselves to capture the market share.
I actually don't think that they're going to go anywhere, to be honest, because the thing that is often overlooked with the PFP era that we are in, and maybe people are surprised we're still in it, is that it really has captured better than anything else just a very simple use case, which is community building. That's actually what it has captured, and it's done it well, and it's been it's so clear, so simple as a use case. So I think long term it will continue to be one. But other things we're really interested in, compressed NFTs is really cool. We don't yet support it on Magic Eden, but yeah, it's something we're looking into, and I can definitely see a lot of interesting use cases for that. You can start to then experiment with very large volumes of NFTs, which I think generally no one has really done up until this point. So we're pretty interested in that. As I said before, we obviously have a lean towards gaming as a use case, because we think that a lot of the behaviors that communities already exhibit with in gaming outside of Web3 is very, very parallel, similar to some of the communities we see in NFTs. And there's obviously the whole ownership element of gaming as well, in that yeah, if you want to grind and play something for a while, which all of us have done at some point with probably many games, you want something to show for it. Like there's something special about being able to say like, yo, I collected all these items. These are actually mine. When I'm done with it, I might be proud to sell those, or I might be proud to give that to someone, right? And it's sort of no reason why that shouldn't actually be done in a way that, exhibits sort of true transferable programmatic ownership. I think that's really, really cool. So we're excited about that. I think some of the other things around like music and ticketing, I think we're pretty early still. So we haven't at Magic Eden spent a lot of time digging into those as of yet, but we are bullish on it long term. We often talk about kind of the S-curve of technological development, and we are somewhere in the early stage of that S-curve, right? Where it's like serving a lot of the crypto native use cases. So that this journey is still pretty early. But I think the stuff that we want to lean into is the very Web3 native teams. Like that's the stuff that I think is most innovative, and it's the most experimental versus say like a very, very large, company necessarily, but they're going to try to do something that's pretty diluted, right? That may bring you potentially a lot of distribution because they have a big audience, but it actually does not push the technology forward. So us at Magic Eden, we spend a lot of time thinking about partnering with, finding people that are doing very like Web3 native stuff, because that's the stuff that I think helps push things forward faster.
Absolutely. Want to actually dig into, because you brought up gaming a couple times here, and that's something I covered a lot in my last job. Did a big tweet thread on it and a large report on just the history of gaming outside of crypto, how games made money and managed economies, and then kind of talking a bit about use cases for things like Web3. And just really quick aside here, because it kind of has a lot of parallels with what you said. Like, yeah, as a gamer during my childhood, I grinded a lot. One example, Call of Duty, you have prestiges and you have these like little call cards and emblems. And so like friends of mine in high school, some of them would grind away and get like 500 AC 130 kills, which just takes forever. And like just to have this like spinning little symbol next to their name, because we spent our nights on this game. Like that's where we hung out. We didn't really hang out in person. And so that became kind of like your clout, so to speak. And so I think like at a high level, it makes complete sense that Web3 can kind of power some of these use cases for like NFTs and games. I think where I get kind of hung up and I'm still trying to like make sense of it all is if you have a game that has like an economy with items, players doing some activity, now this item has value. We saw, for instance, with Step In, what happens when you introduce that item, whether it's the sneakers, to like the real world economy, quote unquote, where people can buy and sell on the secondary market and money can kind of leave the game and kind of cause like cascading crashes in prices. And then people don't want to play it anymore because now the sneakers they bought for $1,000 are worth $50 or whatever. Based on your work at Magic Eden, you guys have a chief gaming officer now and certainly leaning into this use case. Like, how do you think about like the economic design of things like NFTs and games?
Yeah, this is a great point. I actually, that's how we met. I remember I read that thread and I was like, oh, yo, I want to talk to this guy. So I think I DM'd you after that. Yeah. How do we think about it? So it is true. You look at some of these early Web3 games and the economies that existed, they weren't really balanced economies, right? They were probably the opposite of that, where it was like juiced with incentives, and then as a result, the rise is as fast as the fall, right? That's effectively what happened. So that's why I think I would call that like, it's like the Gen 1 of Web3 games, in that actually a lot of those games, not to be, hopefully this is not unfair on some of those teams, because I also really respect those teams that they push the space forward, but they were not traditional game developers, right? They were not actually people that have built really scaled game economies before, all like really, really fun gameplay. So that's the thing that I think we are, at least in the next 6 to 12 months, we are actually quite excited about, because a lot of our team does a lot of play tests for a lot of the games that are coming up. So there's a bunch where we are actually like we play it and we're like, holy shit, that actually is pretty fun. Like, so one, we partnered with them recently to do their drop, and Wildcard is one of those, and really legit team. They've been building games for years and years, and we're excited for what they're building. So that's an example of one. But I think that's basically the next phase. It's sort of like pushing through towards layering on some of the more traditional ways you would build a game economy, and layer on as part of that a token economy, but obviously balanced with really good gameplay. I recognize that when I say these things, these are somewhat theoretical because we don't have a game out there in the market that exactly does these things. But we do believe that the envelope's being pushed at the moment, and hopefully we'll start to see some in the next 6 months, at least just based on some of the gameplay that we have seen.
Like in terms of where games are played, just the numbers, and most of it's mobile. Let's call that 50% or something like that. And then maybe 20, 30% is consoles. So that's like 70, 80% of the market. And only 30% is left for basically everything else. And I think one of the key issues with crypto outside of NFTs even is just it's so hard to use it on mobile. And obviously you can't, connect your ledger to your PS5 or whatever. So I guess like where do you see people kind of trying out these early Web3 games, and like what kind of player base is it? What would the game look like? Are we talking browser games? Are we talking like loading them up on your computer? Like what's that first wedge you think into this vertical?
Yo, you're trying to get me to talk about Solana Saga? Because I will. No, I'm kidding. But
Funny you mentioned that. We actually we talked with Steve in previous episode.
Nice.
Will air before this one, so
cool.
We're big fans of Saga.
No, I am too. So okay, to answer your question, yeah, it's true. I think still it would follow that rough split. Transacting obviously on mobile is going to be really challenging for obvious reasons, given App Store stuff. I think even for a lot of popular mobile games out there, there is some behavior of going to web to basically do the transacting, or like to access a marketplace, right? Like Clash of Clans, for example, you can go buy access a lot of the stuff on a web store, web marketplace. So that could be one way it develops. I don't think it's going to be console. Probably, there's definitely some stuff on browser, but browser is like casual, and it may be the first initial wave, but I think it's got to go mobile.
Final question here, and we talked a bit about it in the beginning on Ordinals and your guys' work in the Bitcoin ecosystem. One kind of funny narrative that's been circulating a bit on Twitter is, Bitcoin ran into a lot of scaling issues, or rather congestion on the network with BRC20s, and obviously Ordinals as well. And a lot of Bitcoiners are really upset about this. There's kind of two camps where one camp embraces these innovations on Bitcoin, and one almost wants to fork Bitcoin and just ditch all of those weird use cases, like BRC20s and Ordinals. So someone on Twitter kind of put out this thread, what if Solana was this L2 for Bitcoin? Do you have any thoughts on this? Like, is it just a pipe dream, or is there any actual substance to this thesis potentially?
I'm extremely bullish Solana as a L2 for Bitcoin. Extremely.
Ooh. Let's go.
That says nothing about the technical feasibility, because I think there's still like quite a bit of I think work that would have to be done, and it would not be easy. But I just think, if you combine sort of the on-chain immutability, purity of Bitcoin being the base layer, and then you have the UX almost that's powered by Solana, that would be obviously insane. That to me sounds amazing. There are different ways this could be achieved. You could kind of classically in a very new sense of the word, bridge assets. But bridging has generally been pretty hard, I would say. And bridging usually is one way. Whereas I think the kind of experience you want is like the two chains recognize that the other asset exists on the other chain, and they're linked in some way, right? That's the experience you actually want. So there are teams we have had conversations with. And yeah, I think this is super interesting and not something that's immediately possible, but down the line, I would, this kind of future I'd be pretty excited about. For now, I would say a lot of, just given where the speed of innovation on ordinals is happening, it's all natively on-chain on Bitcoin. And that's where we expect a lot of the, at least near-term innovation to be. So that's where we're focused. But as there are teams working on this stuff or willing to experiment with it, yeah. If anyone's working on it, let us know. We'd love to talk, because whatever we can do here to help, and I would imagine, bring a lot of liquidity to Solana. Yeah, we're totally down. I think this is really exciting.
Absolutely. I mean, to our earlier point we made, once liquidity is parked at, let's call it an L1, I don't know if Bitcoin really qualifies as that. Bitcoin is just Bitcoin, right? But there's a lot of money in Bitcoin, much more than ETH even. So whoever figures out how to unlock that existing capital and have it kind of be able to be settled on Solana as an L2, yeah, I agree. Like there seems to be a lot of potential tailwinds here that perhaps some builders could unlock. And really all you're competing with at this point is the Stacks ecosystem. I think they're the only ecosystem that's kind of trying to do this already. But I think Solana just has way more interesting builders and tooling and applications that are existing already that I'm pretty bullish too. You know, it's a big technical hurdle to cross, but if that does happen, that pile of money just got bigger than the entire EVM ecosystem overnight. So let's go,
dude. Let's
someone
go.
Figure it out.
Let's go. I'm ready to run through a brick wall right now. Let's go.
Yes. Awesome. Well, we will conclude on that potential bullish tailwind for Solana. Zedd, thank you so much for coming on. Zedd of Magic Eden with us today.